Morgan has requested me on Patreon to review the science fiction film Fly the Navigator. This is one of those 80s films that was a box office disappointment on its original release, but has since attained a decent-sized following of people who either grew up with it or caught it later on. It's a film I'm also positive towards, and fits in well with a lot of the kinds of movies Disney was making in the 1980s. The premise is particularly inspired and with a lot of potential as it focuses on a 12-year-old named David who is suddenly transported 8 years into the future. The filmmakers find some creative angles to explore David's dilemma and how he and NASA react to this strange occurrence. They properly set him up in the opening scenes, and we understand his confusion and fears when he winds up in 1986. Joey Kramer does a particularly good job at depicting his reaction to what's going on and his interactions with his parents, his now teenage brother, and the other characters he meets. Although when I watch the film, I often think about the events from the parents' point of view. That son goes missing all of a sudden, and then when he reappears many years later, he looks like he's not aged a day. The emotions that are going through their heads must be immense, and there's probably an entire separate movie that could have been made just about them. But I understand they're not really the focus, and the film is only 90 minutes. Nonetheless, everyone is nicely fleshed out throughout the film and given fully realized personalities. I already mentioned David and his parents, but I also like how his brother Jeff is portrayed. When they reunite again and he's much older, he's a lot different than he was as an 8-year-old because, well, of course he is. Everyone changes as they grow older, including from child to teenager. I like the newfound bond David and Jeff form. It's a nice lesson to the audience that you never know who might improve and change their behavior in the years since you last saw them. Fly the Navigator does not have a villain, more so an antagonist, the NASA scientist Dr. Faraday. He's mainly curious about what happened to David and what this strange alien spaceship is all about. He's made into a complex character who lets his own fascination with these things get in the way, but he's not a bad person. That makes him a more interesting obstacle than if he was turned into a truly malicious character. However, because of the nature of the story, we are entirely on David's side during the entire predicament. When we get to the scenes with the spaceship, those are a lot of fun. The film takes on a lighter tone as David interacts with Max, the robotic driver of the ship. However, the shift in tone does not feel jarring, and the stakes of the story are still present. Kramer does well acting off puppets, and there are some delightful scenes of them traveling to different places on Earth and listening to the Beach Boys. There's a particularly funny moment when they land at an oil station in Florida and different characters react to the spaceship. Max was voiced by the late Paul Reubens, who displays his versatility in the role. When he's first introduced, Reubens is completely unrecognizable, although he smartly does not use his stereotypical robot voice. That helps give Max personality even before he scans David and takes on his boyish traits. That's when a bit of Pee Wee Herman does slip through, but Reubens does not go overboard when Max displays his sillier side. The visual effects in Fly the Navigator hold up extremely well many years later. What's particularly impressive is the spaceship, which used both an actual model and computer-generated imagery. Fly the Navigator does not seem to get mentioned much when people discuss the evolution of computer animation, but it accomplished some nifty things at the time. The reflective surface of the spaceship was something new for CGI, and an effect that will always amaze me is when the steps to the spaceship change form. The latter predated even The Abyss and Terminator 2 in their use of liquid-like effects, which makes it doubly impressive. The movie was directed by Randall Kleiser, who at that point had primarily been hired to make romance films. Most notably, he directed Grease and The Blue Lagoon. Fly the Navigator was a different type of production for Kleiser, and he pulled off both the science fiction elements and the dramatic stakes of the story really well. There's almost a Spielbergian element to his direction here that works with the material, and if Disney had not picked it up, there's probably an alternate universe where Amblin ends up producing it. There are even points when Kleiser includes shots of characters looking off in amazement at something off camera, one of my favorite Spielberg trademarks. Randall Kleiser would work with Disney a few more times, directing White Fang, which I also like, and Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. The latter had him once again working extensively with visual effects and eventually led to directing the Honey, I Shrunk the Audience attraction, which I have fond memories of seeing at Epcot. As I said at the beginning of the video, Fly the Navigator is also the sort of movie Disney was making at the time, as the studio tried to show it was capable of doing more than just silly animal comedies, and it fits nicely with films like Tron and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. It's a high concept executed with a nice balance of fun, adventure, and drama, and a live imagination. There was still a bit of a stigma towards Disney films at the time, which explains why Fly the Navigator did not do well in original release, but I'm glad it's now developed a bigger audience. Disney has even been trying for years to get a remake off the ground, with quite a few writers and directors coming on board. The most recent update from a few years ago is that Bryce Dallas Howard had signed on to direct the remake. I think there's potential in a remake, but in the meantime, the original film still holds up very well. If you've seen Fly the Navigator, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for the request, Morgan.